Hello everybody. So we just finished up chapter 6 where we were talking about getting energy from food. Now let's get into chapter 7, which is looking at photosynthesis, where we get food from light. So when we think about photosynthesis, what we're talking about is the conversion of light energy to chemical energy. Another way you can think of it is boosting the energy of carbon from low energy carbon to high energy carbon, glucose, sugar. Right? Now you can think of a marshmallow, right? A marshmallow, you can light it on fire, you can give it to a little kid, and you can see for both of those processes how there is so much energy in them. Now photosynthesis, where this boosting of the energy of carbon dioxide up to glucose, takes place in the chloroplasts. Chloroplasts are usually concentrated in the leaves, but we can also find them, in the whole body of a plant, on the surface of a cactus, in the whole cell, or in this weird plant, which is actually just roots, and it's photosynthetic roots, and this is just a orchid plant that has only roots. It's a weird plant. But, anywhere that a plant is green, it's going to have those chloroplasts. Now there are some plants that are never green, and this is a ghost pipe. And ghost pipes are actually parasitic on a fungus that lives with plants. So a nearby tree will produce sugars, give those sugars to this fungus. The fungus then uses those sugars, but this plant steals those sugars from the fungus, and it can grow that way by being parasitic of, essentially on that original tree that we talked about. They're weird. They are, you can find them in Wisconsin, but they're not very common. So when we think about the equation for photosynthesis, we see it's carbon dioxide plus water plus light, and we get glucose, sugar, and oxygen. Now, we get these things, though, the products in different parts. The CO2, we get it in the leaves, the water from the roots. Inside the leaves, then, light is harvested. That inside the leaves, where that's happening, is the chloroplasts. There's the double membrane, just like the mitochondria has two membranes, so does a chloroplast. And there's these stacks of thylakoids. Essentially, all you need to know is as light hits the chloroplast, the chlorophyll is inside these thylakoid things. Now, remember that the waste products of respiration are the reactants for photosynthesis. It's kind of like the opposite of respiration, right? And what photosynthesis does is it boosts electrons uphill to capture that energy and store that energy in, eventually, sugar. So to get there, to talk about this process, we should probably talk about why plants are green, okay? Now, let's pretend that you have a green shirt on, okay? The shirt itself is green because white light, which is made out of the rainbow, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple, hits your shirt, and if it's green, all the colors but the green are absorbed, and the green is reflected off your shirt. If you have a white shirt, it's reflecting most of the light. If you have a black shirt, you're absorbing most of the light. So nothing really reflects off of a black shirt. So what we see is plants, though, are all sorts of different colors. Sometimes they're orangey, sometimes they're yellow, sometimes plants can be gray almost. This leaf here is purple, and it has some sort of pigments that make it purple. Now, the pigments that we most care about are chlorophyll, because those are the ones that undergo photosynthesis. These other things, though, are do other jobs. They might protect it from UV radiation or allow the plant to get warm. But you might be noticing right about now, the leaves are starting to change color. Maple trees in particular turn this bright red, and the carotenes and the xanthophylls are coming out and becoming much more visible. Now, I like to make an analogy of how this works is with football. right? So I'm from Minnesota. I'm a huge Vikings fan. So when the Vikings play the Packers in Lambeau Field, if you look at blimp a blimp shot of the stadium, what does the fans look like? Like, what color do you see in the fans, in the stands of the stadium? It's all green, right? It's like a sea of green. There are Vikings players, or there are Vikings fans there, but you just don't see them. Now, since the Vikings are a much better team, they win 45-0. In the fourth quarter, they're up 45-0, right? And all the Packer fans are exiting the stadium with 2 minutes to go, and the Vikings fans are cheering there. But if you look at that blimp shot, basically, the stands appear more purple now. Now, those Vikings fans were there for the whole game since the first quarter, but all the green has been kind of like taken out of the stadium, and what we see come through is the purple. Now, the same thing here in this leaf. The red and the oranges are there the whole time, but now the plant is no longer undergoing photosynthesis because there's not really enough sunlight anymore. The day length, is only from 7 until 6 maybe. There's not enough sunlight, so it's not worth it anymore. So they don't make any more chlorophyll. But chlorophyll is that super important pigment that we're going to talk about for this lecture. Now, chlorophyll absorbs the blue light and the red light. This is an absorption spectrum right here, where we see that, the higher we are in this graph, the more of that light color is actually absorbed. So it uses up all the purple, a good amount of the blue, but it just passes. It either reflects or allows the green and the yellow light to pass through, and it starts absorbing the orange and the red light. This is why plants are, green, right here. That green light, you can just go right through the leaf. It's not absorbed by the chlorophyll. Now, this is the time where we're going to talk about light a little bit more. We can think about light as a wave or a photon. I prefer in the biology to think about it as a photon. Now, a photon is a fixed quantity of light energy, like a particle of light. Now, different colors of light then have different wavelengths and have different amounts of energies. So if you look at UV light, what is in this tanning bed here, it has a very small wavelength, and it has between 3 and 124 electron volts. The UVB, which is getting set down here at more the lower energy, and the higher energy is like UVA. So that's why most tanning beds are UVA. Are UVB, because it's technically safer. But what's happening is when UV light it hits your skin, it has enough energy to pass through those upper layers of skin and hit that base levels of skin that is just growing and literally break apart your DNA. And then when your body wants to repair that DNA, sometimes it makes a mistake, that causes a mutation, and that can cause skin cancer. Whereas visible light only has between 2 and 3 electron volts of energy. It's not going to do that ever, right? So when you go to the tanning bed, or even if you just lay outside, what you're doing is you're throwing a bunch of UV light at your body, and your body reacts to it and says, I don't like this, and it creates melanin. And the melanin then is a pigment that absorbs that UV light before it can get to the base layers of your skin. So this is one reason, like if you're very fair, if you have very light colored skin, you need to be much more aware of your UV exposure, because someone with very fair and light skin can get skin cancer a lot easier than someone with darker skin. It's not to say that someone with very dark skin can't get skin cancer, because they definitely can. It's just more rare in the population. I'm going to skip that. So when we think about photosynthesis now, this light, these energy in the light is hitting the chlorophyll in these light reactions. And the chlorophyll is essentially capturing that solar energy to create ATP. Now that ATP then is combined, or I should say, the Calvin cycle takes that ATP and uses the energy in it to link carbon dioxide into sugar. If you remember when we were talking about fats, I was talking about the more bonds that you have, or when you're making these chemical bonds, what you're doing is creating a bunch of like it takes energy to make these bonds. So to link carbon dioxide into sugar, you need to get energy. Where did that energy come from? The ATP. That ATP came from the energy to make that ATP came from the light hitting the chlorophyll. I don't really want to go too far into the Calvin cycle, but what you'll notice here is that we get 3 carbon dioxides coming in here and creating this G3P. Well, don't really worry about that. But what's happening is the Calvin cycle is where the actual sugar production is happening. And this is where the CO2 goes into the plant and gets used up. So where does that CO2, how does it get into the plant? It goes through these things called stomata. They're tiny little holes in a leaf. And they have these guard cells around them. And when the guard cells are full of water, what happens is they swell up and open up, and there's a hole that goes through the into the inside of the leaf. And carbon dioxide will go in there. And when there's plenty of water in the leaf, these guard cells are open, but they're losing a lot of water through that little hole. But that's okay because there's plenty of water, so that the plant can then photosynthesize and get CO2 into its leaf. As the plant then starts to dry out, it wilts, right? I don't have a picture of wilting. Sorry, I thought I did. As the plant wilts then, these stomata close up, and the actual wilting is actually a adaptation to so that the plant doesn't lose as much water. So if we look at stomata, if they kind of want to hide, right? Because if they were out in the sun all the time, they would dry out. So if you look at like clover, you only find stomata on the underside of the leaf, not on the top, because the sun would shine on that clover and it would dry it out too fast. In plants, though, that the leaves are vertical, we don't have stomata like only on one side, they're on both sides. Because there's no advantage to having the stomata on one side or the other. There are plants, though, that do have stomata on the top side, like a lily pad, right? It can't have the stomata on the bottom. If those holes were in the the leaf would literally fill up with water and sink to the bottom. But water isn't limiting to a lily pad, so that's not really that big of a deal. All right, that's it for Chapter 7. Be sure to check for more stuff.